Welcome back, Wolfpack. Fox Trevize here. I am joined tonight by myself. That's right. I have taken command from the dire wolf. You might say that I am the captain now. I would not say that, but people do say that. Really, they do. But this is all for a good cause, I assure you, because tonight I bring you a dire warning. Beware the planners and the recent converts, for they are the most dangerous of all. But first, before we get into all that, I want to thank our sponsors. This show is only possible because I produce it, but also because of viewers like you. We would especially like to thank those of you that donate to us financially, including Kaylette, Oremain, Nathan, Cameron, Tetris Freak, Slowpoke Garcia, Thundra Erikin, there we go, who is female, and the White Lion, who is a lion. Money is not the only way that you can give, though. We also appreciate you liking and subscribing to us on DLive, Twitch, and YouTube. And we especially like when you share links to the channel on any social media you happen to find yourself on. So, tonight we are going to be talking mostly about Unity 2020, which if you guys have not heard, it is a new kind of thing that Brett Weinstein has been advocating for. It's recently come to my attention anyways. The proposal is basically a way to shortcut the Constitution as a way of fundamentally changing the United States government in how it operates. It's a pretty bold move, Brett. So we're going to get more into Unity 2020 shortly. But before we do, I want to discuss some other experimental political systems that have been proposed over the years. And we'll kind of compare those to how Unity 2020 is really just the exact same repackaging of all these previous political schemes. I want to do this so I can highlight the trend of how you can identify political systems in the vein of Unity 2020 and how you can identify people like Brett. And why they should be ignored. Because while Brett might fancy himself an intellectual with novel ideas, I assure you he is not nearly as clever or novel as he thinks he is. So, I got to do all the producing and the notes and all the stuff myself, so be mindful if I have to stop for a second to do stuff. I don't have Dyer here to cover for me, so, it's a fun experiment for us all. So first off, we have the Republic. Our first example of a experimental political system that we're going to talk about tonight was proposed by Plato about 2,500 years ago in his story called The Republic. Now, let's be clear. Plato was in no way advocating for this system. It was merely a thought experiment, and it was done mostly to explain why a system like the Republic wouldn't work. The society of the fictional Republic, there were several castes. It was a caste system. You'll see that's a theme here tonight. In the first caste, we have the rulers, who Plato described as philosopher kings. Mind you, that Plato considered himself a philosopher. Plato would also go on to describe how the philosophers are the best type of people to lead societies because only they know what is truly good and that they are also not greedy. Plato was also a member of a wealthy political family, so, that might have influenced his views on the concept of want and greed and corruption and, philosophers in general. The second caste in the fictional Republic was the helpers and farmers and other craftsmen. The third caste was the guardians, or what would be considered the military. To keep the caste system stable and rigid in the Republic, Plato devised what became known as the noble lie, which would be indoctrinated into the population. The lie was that those fit to rule had gold in their souls, and that those fit to be servants, farmers, and craftsmen had silver in their souls, and that those fit for military life had brass and iron in their souls. The metal of your soul would determine your caste for the rest of your life. But the benevolent Plato left room for upward mobility in that the parents of one metal, yeah, you had to marry within your caste system. That kind of sucks, right? But anyways, the parents of one metal, let's say a silver set of parents, they might give birth to a soul of gold or iron. And in this society, it was only the gold-souled leaders who could sort out the souls, because it wasn't really true that they had metal in their souls. It was a lie that the philosophers told everybody to stay in control. And so naturally, only the philosophers were able to figure out what kind of metal you had in your soul, because it was a lie. There's a lot more to the Republic than that. This was a very, very brief overview of it. But these were kind of the main parts that we needed to know for my purposes tonight. Now, while I said that Plato never seriously advocated for this sort of society, the reason he did not think it could work was because of his belief in something called forms. Without getting too deep into what forms are, the very, very basic version of the idea is that there exists perfect things. For instance, somewhere there is a perfect circle, and all other circles are imperfect forms of that singular perfect circle. Something more complex would be like a chair. This is something that like Plato actually believed, which is kind of ridiculous. That there's many different kinds of chairs all over the world, but somewhere, probably on another plane of existence, there exists a single perfect chair. This idea is patently ridiculous. But this is why Plato didn't think that the Republic would work, because he wrote it in an imperfect he considered it to be an imperfect version of the ideal or the perfect society that must exist somewhere, and that what he was writing was merely an imperfect form of this. He also believed that these perfect forms could only be grasped by philosophers like himself, and that these perfect forms might actually be achieved if humans could advance themselves enough. In summary, Plato's Republic was a political system proposed by a philosopher in which philosophers would be in charge. Philosophers would divide the population into castes at their whim, because only the philosophers were immune from corruption, and only the philosophers knew what it was to be good. If something about the society was not working, well, then that only meant that the philosophers needed to philosophize more until they achieved perfection. That's kind of the cliff notes of Plato's Republic. You'll notice the themes here. Our next story is Utopia. That's Utopia. Next, we have Sir Thomas More's Utopia. Like Plato, More's modeling of Utopia's political system was more of a thought experiment rather than something he was actually advocating for. But the general inspiration of the story is that, or the general interpretation of the story is that More thought of his fictional society to be more of an ideal setup, but he did think that it was ultimately unachievable. So again, similar to Plato, where he thought it was the perfect ideal society setup, he just didn't think that humans were capable of achieving it. Also, more so than... Oh, more. Yeah, I needed to capitalize that. More is such a common word. More so than More, the story was the inspiration for many of the planners in the centuries since it was written. So Thomas More wrote this in the early 1500s, and he had a lot of inspiration from Plato, who wrote it in the mid-400s BC. And then all these subsequent stories will all have taken inspiration from the Republic and Utopia. In the story of Utopia, we once again have a caste system. I'll go bottom up this time. So there were slaves. Oh, that's nice. And then there were the common tradesmen. And then above them were the scholars. Scholars may promote tradesmen to become scholars if they are deemed worthy. And it is from the scholars that the rulers and the priests of Utopia are selected. More, Sir Thomas More, was himself a scholar and was closely associated with the church and was heavily involved in British politics in the 1500s. So, to summarize Utopia, we have a scholar who has proposed a political system where scholars would be in charge. Scholars would get to divide the population into castes at their whim. More also ascribed to Plato's ideals that philosophers were uncorruptible, and as long as the philosophers engaged in study from birth, they would remain uncorrupted. In this way, the philosophers would know what it was to be good. Sir Thomas More also knew that his scholarly philosopher kings would be ruling an imperfect system, but that was no problem at all, because through more philosophizing and planning, they would be able to perfect the system's flaws. Are we seeing a pattern here? Next up, we have our a notable fiction author, Karl Marx, when he wrote the Communist Manifesto. Unlike his predecessors, Plato and Sir Thomas More, Karl actually wanted to see his fictional society come to fruition. I'll be honest, I only have a passing knowledge of what is in the Communist Manifesto. I think I should probably read it by choice sooner rather than reading it later at gunpoint. But either way, in his writing about his fictional society, Marx described a classless, perfect society, which seems at odds with our previous stories that both described societies with rigid caste structures. While Marx claims that all the people will be equal, he does make an exception for some people that will be more equal. He calls these more equal people conscious communists, who those will be the people that make up the Communist Party. And the Communist Party will benevolently defend the common interests of the working class. I really loved this, that he describes a classless society and then immediately goes into how there'll be stratification. Some people will be more class than others, I guess. Unlike in previous stories, the previous two stories that we just covered, we actually have some real-world examples that we can reference to summarize how Marxism works. Hundreds of examples, actually, and hundreds of millions of bodies, to be precise. Under Marxism, we have a communist, which would be Marx. So this is again the summary. Under Marxism, we have a communist who has proposed a political system where the communists would be in charge, and the communists would divide the population at their whim, because only the communists are free from capitalist corruption, and only the communists know what it is to be good, because they're not capitalists. And if something in society isn't working, well, that only means that the communists need to implement more communism. We see this with the, quote, real communism has never been tried before. If only the communists could have had more time for communism, eventually they will find the perfect version, the perfect form, if you will, of communism. I bet we all can't wait for that, right? 100 million bodies and counting, and we're still trying to get it right. We're still looking for that perfect form of communism. I can't wait till we get there. It's going to be great. I'm just not sure how many more bodies it's going to take. I don't know if we have enough grave space for that. I guess that's why the communists use mass graves. Anyways, our next fictional society is a resource-based economy. This is the last example of a proposed political system before I get onto Brett's proposed political system. A resource-based economy is a system that is unironically being sold as fully automated luxury communism, which was a giant meme during Brexit because one of the British communists actually said that, and I think one of the British papers actually published an article saying it's time for fully automated luxury communism, as if just saying those words will make it pop into existence. But a resource-based economy is essentially, they wouldn't call it this, but I would call it this. I would call it fully automated luxury communism because they're both pure fantasy. this concept was a central theme. A resource-based economy was a central theme to a series of documentaries that came out a few years ago called Zeitgeist. That's kind of what popularized the idea of a resource-based economy. It had been around before that, but those documentaries kind of got it into the, well, public zeitgeist, I guess. Maybe that was the point of naming it that. They're on Netflix. They are not a bad watch if you are interested in some interesting ideas and a bad system. But yeah, you guys can go look that up if you want some more detail about it. But in short, the summary for what a resource-based economy is, the guy that's really championing it, he is an engineer who is proposing a political system where engineers would be in charge, and engineers would divide the population based on their aptitude, because engineers, he believes, are free from corruption because they know all the good solutions to solving problems. And if something in society wasn't working, well, that only means that the engineers would need to engineer more solutions. Hopefully you can see the theme here now, guys. People who are proposing political systems where they get to be in charge. That's that's real 8D level chess you're playing there. I see right through it, guys. But again, the theme: people proposing political systems where they get to be in charge. I just can't think of anything more. I don't even know what a word for it is. I guess nefarious, crafty, scheming. I don't know. It's not good though. But that brings us to Bret Weinstein. Oh, Bret, what have you proposed? So Bret Weinstein has only recently, recently within the last 3 years, become more of a well-known cultural figure. If you don't know who he is, you probably recognize the name. Technically, Bret Weinstein is a biologist, and he's a very capable biologist at that. He's made some really big advances in the field of biology. I've looked at some of his work, a little above my head, but from my understanding, he's very, very good at biology. So all the more power to him. I won't deny that by all definitions, he is a genius in the field of biology. A little asterisk there. And his work with lab mice lineages was really revolutionary. He's figured out some big stuff with Big Pharma that Big Pharma really didn't like, and they kind of came after him for it. So, anytime somebody's fighting the system like that, go for it. And really, at the end of this, my conclusion is going to be he needs to focus on that and get the heck out of the news. Let's see here. So, but that is why his name. But that isn't why his name is familiar in the current culture war. His name's not familiar in the current culture war because he figured out something about lab mice. The reason why his name is familiar to the culture war is because in 2017, Bret was a biology professor at Evergreen State College in Washington. He made waves by resisting an increasingly radical SJW movement that was taking over the campus. The escalation culminated when a council of diversity requested that all white professors and students leave campus for the day. Bret, being a white guy, refused to leave, after which began a months-long campaign by the students to get him fired. Bret's refusal to take a knee to the mob is admirable, and it ultimately resulted in him resigning from his position. Let me take a drink here and I'll check out chat. I see here. Woo! I almost just broke a glass. See here. Timberwolf said, I find it funny that Plato was a disciple of Socrates. Then he was named, I don't know how to pronounce that. Actually, it was the other way around, Timber. Socrates was Plato's student, though I think that they learned a lot from each other. Let's see here. Yeah, Tramver says technocracy, which is a technocracy is basically anytime you want to put experts in charge of something. I actually used to ascribe to that kind of idea, but I think that was an effect of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where I thought, I was a little bit younger. Oh, I know everything there is to know. I think that this idea would work about putting experts in charge. That just makes sense, right? But as you kind of grow up and evolve your understanding of politics and philosophy, you kind of realize that's a very childish way of looking at the world. Like communism, or communism's a very childish idea. Well, just give people money, just make everything equal, just give people houses. It's very childlike. It completely misses the point of how you keep stable markets going, how you keep the cost of living or the I'm missing the word here, but the standards of living, you keep those at level or rising. All the problems people think that capitalism has by far been the biggest elevation to people's living standards in history. Now, some people are getting their living standards boosted a lot faster than others, and a lot faster than any other time in history. And yeah, that does create some problems, but I'd kind of rather Jeff Bezos be worth like $1 billion trillion and me have like my 5 awesome screens and my RGB keyboard and this very nice microphone and an internet that I can talk to all you guys with. I'd much rather have all that and Bezos have $60 billion trillion than, I don't know, being a dust farmer in the 1600s and like die after I got kicked in the chest by a horse. Like that, I much prefer this, even though the wealth disparity is a little rough. There's a solution for that, but I kind of like the way this stuff is. But it's and the technocracy, back to what I was saying, the idea of it being childish, the technocracy is like, well, just put experts in charge. Like, yeah, that makes sense to a child. It's like, well, they know how to do this stuff. Just put them in charge. But that misses a lot of the point about, well, it's not very liberty-minded. Just because they're experts doesn't mean that they know everything there is to know about something. Usually an expert really means that you've got experience in it. It doesn't mean that you have perfect knowledge in it. So again, this idea of just throw an expert at it. That's very childish. Let's see here. I don't remember the Rhodes show. Hello, Shadow Wolf. And then Plato. Timberwolf said Plato was a student of Socrates. You're going to have to look that up because I was just reading that, and I was pretty sure I read that Socrates was under Plato. Maybe I read that wrong. Let's see here. So, back to Brett Weinstein. So, like I said, reason why he's of note in the culture war, he was 2017, he got basically canceled at his university for refusing to leave campus merely because he was white. Brett is by no means the first casualty in the culture war at the hands of the SJW mob. His story, however, did seem to capture the interest of centrists, libertarians, and conservatives who became very obsessed with his story and began holding it up as an example of what is wrong in American universities and the real dangers, as an example of the real dangers of cancel culture. Personally, I think that by the mid-2017, I think that we were all pretty familiar with the dangers of cancel culture. I don't think that we needed another martyr to like really sell it to us. I think that we knew that it was bad by that point. But I think that a lot of personalities on the right kind of liked the idea of having a former professor that was calling out problems in universities. Though I think that glomming onto Brett was a big mistake, and more on that later. Having been made famous for being a martyr in the culture war, Brett has taken it upon himself to comment on political matters. And that brings us to what today's topic really is. Recently, Brett Weinstein proposed a plan that he is calling Unity 2020. Ooh, that sounds unifying. I love it. Rather than explaining it myself, the following is a direct quote from Brett in a recent interview he had with the National Review. Quote, "The Unity ticket is meant to provide an alternative. The proposal proceeds as follows. We draft 2 candidates, one from center-left, one from center-right. They agree to govern as a team. All decisions and appointments are made jointly in the interests of the American public. Only when a decision does not allow for consultation does the president decide independently. A coin flip determines which candidate runs at the top of the ticket. If elected, this shared mode of governance goes on for 4 years. Afterwards, the 2 candidates reverse position. i.e., the second candidate gets to be at the top of the ticket. And this cycle continues until one of them becomes ineligible. As for the candidates themselves, they must possess at least 3 central characteristics. They must be patriotic, courageous, and highly competent. That's a lot to break down there. So first off, we're going to go through that kind of line by line. So the first point here, we draft 2 candidates, one from center left and one from center right. Okay, cool. But who's we that will be doing the drafting? To the best of my knowledge, we already have a system where candidates can step forward for nomination in an election. And that, the fact that Brett chooses the word draft is interesting, as it has the connotation of being kind of compulsory, or that there's stipulations and kind of regulations around its selection. So it sounds a lot more regimented. We know that it does actually have those stipulations for selection, because he said that it would be one from the center left and one from the center right, which begs the question, what in the hell does he consider center left and center right? Do we mean the old center left or the new center left, which has been dragged well past socialism at this point? What about the center right? The right is such a big tent. What is even in the center? And again, why do we need to draft people? I mean, does he mean nominate? I mean, we already have a nomination process within each party. It sounds like he's proposing a new party, but if you, as we'll continue through here, I don't think that's what he's going for. Brett actually has proposals for who he thinks fit these 2 centers, the center left and the center right, and we'll go into those. We'll see who those 2 people are after we go through this kind of description here. But continuing through his description, he says, they agree to govern as a team. All decisions and appointments are made jointly in the interest of the American public. So basically, he's shortcutting the Constitution to restructure the executive branch without going through all those messy amendment procedures. I can't really say I'm a fan of that. I guess this is a decent enough workaround that if you can get 2 people to agree that they're just not going to act in the way that the Constitution allows them, I guess that's like technically legal. I don't think it's in the spirit of what we thought we were electing. Also, I love this, in the interests of the American public. Wow, yeah, that's so obviously, it's just like they need to have the characteristics of being patriotic. Like, of course, we would expect our leaders to act in the interest of the American public. I mean, this is all very, very childish. I'm getting flashbacks to reading what was said to be the first draft of the Green New Deal, but I think we all know that was the latest draft of the Green New Deal, back when AOC released that, and it had all these very, very childish ideas in there. And it's very interesting that somebody as academically credentialed as Brett Weinstein would put out something with this just very cloudy language, where it's very imprecise, and it's got a lot of these very basic ideas in there. Like, I think it would be great if we had somebody who had the interest of the American public. It would be great if they were president. Like, yeah, I think that kind of goes without saying. I don't know why he thinks it's intellectual to propose that. Again, it seems like a very childish way of looking at it. Let's see. The next section. Only when a decision does not allow for consultation does the president decide independently. A coin flip determines which candidate runs at the top of the ticket. A coin flip for the presidency. Again, this is kind of reading like a 5-year-old wrote this, or maybe AOC wrote this. I find it hard to take seriously, but one of the reasons why I am taking this seriously and doing a show on it is because Brett was actually on Tucker Carlson a few weeks ago explaining this. He's been on Joe Rogan recently explaining this. He's gone through a lot of media circuits doing a lot of interviews on this. So there's a lot of people that are kind of like pseudo taking this seriously. So I think it needs to be addressed, because you get someone like Tucker who he'll be combative a little bit with people who he's kind of ideologically opposed to, but mostly on his show he's pretty cordial with the guests. Joe Rogan, you tell him anything and he just loves it and goes for it. He's a really easygoing guy. A little bit of a squish on his ideology when it comes to stuff like this, where you'll just propose something and be like, wow, that's a really great idea. Not that Joe Rogan's not a good guy. It's just I don't think that Brett Weinstein's getting the kind of back pressure on this that would be appropriate for it. I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, Brett's very smart, so this must be very smart, and I'm just going to assume that it's very smart. When if you actually look at it, again, I think it looks very childish, and I can't believe that someone of his stature would think that this was a worthwhile contention. Let's see here. So this shared mode of governance goes on for 4 years. Afterwards, the two candidates reverse positions, i.e. the second candidate gets to go to the top of the ticket. And this cycle continues until one of them becomes ineligible. It's really hard to get past the stupidity of this. So he wants to take a system where currently half the people in the country hate the president for 4 years. And he wants to turn that into a system where half the country hates the president for 16 years. 8 years at the helm for each of his two partner candidates. That's just fucking beyond genius. That is being proposed as a good idea. Let's take a position where we hate the guy, half the country hates the guy for 4 years, and let's just extend that out for 16 years and see what happens. I just don't understand how this is a solution to the current problem. And it's not going to get any better when we look into which candidates he thinks would be worthwhile for this sort of system. Let's see here. This next part really gets me. Quote, as for the candidates themselves, they must possess at least 3 central characteristics. They must be patriotic, courageous, and highly competent. Patriotic, courageous, and highly competent. Yeah, because those words have very simple definitions that everyone agrees with. Define patriotic. Define courageous. Define competent. He has not actually defined any of these in any of the interviews that I've seen, and I've looked at a lot of his material on this. Because, again, a lot of people are kind of taking this seriously, and I think that they're just getting taken for a ride and doing kind of an appeal to authority. Because Brett is very smart. In the context of biology, I don't think he's real. I don't think that he's any better than amateur in the realm of politics. I will say that. Certainly I have a lot of basic ideas about politics and how systems works, how the system should work. But you don't see the National Review interviewing me about this stuff. They're really only doing that because he has credentials as a martyr in the SJW war, in the culture war, and because he's a very, very talented biologist. If he was anyone else, he wouldn't be getting this kind of traction on this sort of politics. It's very, very, very basic political ideas that if anybody else had these very basic political ideas, no one's going to care. You're not going to get an interview on Tucker. You're not going to go get to sit with Joe Rogan for 3 hours. You're not going to get an interview with a whole bunch of different magazines. You would be called basic, as would be appropriate. But because Brett was a martyr in the culture war, he just gets kind of this default credential that he gets a pass for having these very childish ideas. Let's see here. Let me take a drink and check out chat. Alrighty, so Triumvirate says, I think it was the first time a leftist had been canceled like that. I'm going to get into that and get kind of the, I think canceled in that specific way, yes, you're right, but I'm going to list some other examples of similar but not the same kind of events. Certainly I think that he was a flashpoint, but we'll get into that, Triumvirate. Stay tuned. And let's see here. Trevor, why does he think the president governs America? The president is charged with enforcing laws. And let's see here. The box is blocking it. and something about U.S. and foreign policy. Yeah, that's one of the things too is people don't. I would say especially the left doesn't understand the role of the president. They kind of just think it's like the king or the dictator because that's kind of what they want the position to become. Unless of course it's Orange Man bad, then then the president can't do anything. It's got to be chained up and throw away the key. There's only two branches of government if Orange Man's at the helm of the executive. So, but yeah, the way Ben Shapiro puts it is the left and the progressives have created this. They've turned the government into this giant gun. So under like kind of libertarian, conservative, small government type, the idea is that you want the government to be small enough that it doesn't matter if one of your ideological enemies gets control of the government. It's so small it can't hurt you. But because we've had this Leviathan government grow to such immense size over the last, I mean, basically since World War II, really since World War I probably, with the whatever the bailout thing was for the Great Depression. I forget what it's called. But government's just been growing unprecedented sizes the last century. And so, and we've seen under the Obama administration a complete disregard for, or a complete willingness to use the powers of the Leviathan government against their political adversaries. We see that most clearly with the Trump Russia hoax, but there was also a lot of stuff going after the Tea Partiers, going after Christian nonprofits, going after a lot of different people using the IRS to abuse the audit system against conservative voices. And we've seen more than that. There was, Obama was using his powers against the AP and other journalists for investigating him. Absolute destruction of whistleblowers. The problem with the government now is it's so big, and there's now precedent that you can use that giant government to just bash your political opponents over the head, that now it becomes really, really important that you get the presidency. The presidency is this giant loaded gun, and if you don't get to it first, whoever gets it's going to use it to shoot you. So it's very, very important that you struggle as hard as you can to get that gun, because if you don't, that's the end. And that's only gotten more and more true, and I think that's the most true in this election. If Biden gets it, if Biden gets that gun, they are going to whack the Republicans so hard over the head with it. We're going to have, and by Republicans, I'm using it as a proxy for getting any semblance of conservatives or libertarians in there. The Republican Party as the organization's a poor proxy for that, but it's the best we got. They will beat us so hard over the head with the power of the government, it's likely that we won't be winning again anytime soon. If the Republicans get it again, I would say that we're not going to be beating people over the head, but it would seem likely that Trump and Barr are going to at least be cleaning house for actual crimes. I don't see any way of Trump. I know the left keeps pretending like he is, but I just don't see the FBI and the intelligence agencies following the whim of Trump to go after his political adversaries in the same way that they did for Obama and other establishment Republican candidates. So I think that Trump's kind of the safer option. I think he's a safe handler of the big government gun pointed at all of our heads, whereas the left, as soon as they get it, well, they won't be able to pull the trigger fast enough. I lost where I was. Let's see here. Oh, I was talking about, I was reading chat. That's where we were at. The New Deal. Yes. I think hearing the Green New Deal like erased the original New Deal out of my mind. That's why I lost the words for it. Triumvirate says, yeah, Dinesh D'Souza calls it the gangsterization of the government. There has been a lot of that over the years. Yes, absolutely. So back to this Unity 2020. So again, keep that in your heads that, well, the presidents should be patriotic, courageous, and highly competent. Well, no fucking shit. Again, like a small child if you ask them like what would be a good what would be a good form of president, like what should they have, like, oh well, I think that they should be patriotic, it'd be nice if they were courageous, they should be able to do stuff, highly competent. It's very childish. It's very childish to propose this as your limitations for or your credentials for a presidency. I think it's childish not because it's wrong. It's childish because it's so obvious, and it is the kind of nefarious part of it is he's proposing these childish, obvious things, but claiming himself to be the arbiter of what the definitions of these things are. Normally, we would want a president. It seems obvious to all American voters that you would want your president to be patriotic, right? But patriotic means different things to different people. That's why they come to different conclusions about who to vote for. And the average of what Americans would consider to be patriotic is who gets elected. Same thing with courageous and competent. Although I think if you are voting for Joe Biden at this point, I don't think that highly competent's on your list. Though I will say Joe Biden's very courageous for going after Corn Pop with a chain. So, we'll go with that. Patriotic, I don't know. But Brett Weinstein, he's proposing a system where he takes that decision-making power of the American population as a whole to group decide on what they think the average of patrioticness is based off the candidates. Brett Weinstein wants to take that ability to define patriotic away from the American voter, and he wants to decide what it is. He wants to decide what patriotic is. We'll get more into that later. So the reason why I prefaced the talking about Unity 2020 with those previous stories of proposed political systems is because Brett is setting himself up as a centrist, and he is proposing a system where we let the centrists like him decide who the pool of rulers can be. When he says we will draft candidates, we will draft people that are centrist. Well, who's the we? Again, like I said, we already have a system of elections set in place where candidates are allowed to step forward and be nominated. When he says we will draft in the context of proposing a different way of doing stuff, I can only imagine he means we, as in a smaller subset of the American population, will get to be deciding on those candidates. Let's see here. So he has elevated, as a centrist, he will elevate other centrists from the cast of non-centrists. And like Plato's philosopher kings that could see the gold in men's souls, Brett is scholarly enough, he's philosophical enough, and he's smarter than you enough to see into men's hearts and weigh them for patriotism, courage, and competency. It's very, very similar to all of these previous stories that we just went through about, you have a person who is a type of person who is proposing a system where that type of person happens to be in charge. It's a little, it seems a little convoluted and nefarious to me. So Brett thinks that his scheme is novel, but it's not. The second that I heard him talk about Unity 2020, all of these different stories, the Republic, Utopia, Marxism in general, and then a resource-based economy, all of those came to mind because it's more of the same thing. It's more of somebody's an expert at something, and they think that that particular expertise should be in charge of society. It's not new thought. It's very childish. It's very selfish, and it's extremely arrogant. It's extremely arrogant. It is the height of arrogance, to be precise. But I do want to give Brett the benefit of the doubt for just a second here. In his interview with the National Review, he proposed two names that fit his criteria of center-left and center-right. Let's take a look at those names now. So for his Unity 2020 proposals, for center-left, he proposed Andrew Yang. And for center-right, he proposed retired Navy Admiral William McRaven. Let's see here. I'll get into what he had to say about Yang in a second here. I see we got some activity on YouTube. let's see here. What's the YouTube comments got to say? A lot of laughing. YouTube comments is very small right now. Can't make it bigger. Let's see here. Okay, so Avanova said Corn Pop was a bad dude. That's true. Let's see here. Voracious Blackston said it's because most people don't have a drive to create something themselves, so they work hard for others and get the leftovers. Let's see here. You should see the statues in Philly. Franklin was a Greek god, apparently. I bet he was. I heard isn't Benjamin Franklin wasn't he supposed to be kind of like a playboy of the 1700s? He is kind of very he seemed like he was more of a modern man than somebody of the 1700s from the stories I've heard of him. I don't know if that's like heresy or not though. Let's see here. Alrighty. Let's see here. Titus Terrence, a government is a giant gun. That was back earlier. Yep. So, cool. Alrighty. So, into what he had to say, what Burt Weinstein had to say about Andrew Yang and why he thinks Andrew Yang is center-left. So, you guys are all probably familiar with Yang. Is Yang center-left? I guess. I don't know. It's hard to say. And again, what is the definition of center-left? It's very, very vague. Yang is for border security, but looking at his campaign site, he's only criticizing the walls and use of border security personnel. So, I mean, he says that he's for border security, but his campaign site only criticizes securing the border. He doesn't actually propose any solutions for how he might secure the border. He does have a bunch of new paths for illegal citizens already here to get citizenship, or illegal immigrants to get illegal aliens to get citizenship. So he's got a lot of new paths for that, which I guess maybe that's what he means by border control, is that you just open up the floodgates to citizenship. I don't know if that's center left. I guess maybe. On gun control, he's pretty flimsy, which I would take that over Beto any day. I'll take a flimsy Andrew Yang on gun control over Beto's. Hell yes, for taking your AR-15. He might be taking something from the AR-15, but it's not going to be most of the gun. And then there is Yang's UBI, Universal Basic Income Freedom Dividend. I don't know if that's a center-left idea. That sounds a little far left to me, but who am I to decide? I don't know. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I know which candidate is perfectly in the center left, because I'm not arrogant enough to think that I can define center left. So is Yang center left? I guess maybe. I don't know. I really don't know. And I think it's very arrogant to have proposed that he is. Again, if you want to propose him as a nominee, like let's say Andrew or not Andrew, let's say Brett Weinstein went about this a little bit differently. Let's say he said, I want to propose a new party called the Unity Party, and we are going to nominate a ticket of Andrew Yang and Admiral William McRaven because we think that they fit with our values. That would be perfectly fine. But he's not proposing a new party. He's just proposing that all Americans should follow his edict as to what the definition of center left and center right is and what his definition of patriotism is. I get it. If it was a party, if he was proposing a party, I wouldn't have a problem for this. But it's because he's proposing this like kind of backdoor change to the Constitution is a little bit of a, I don't know. It weirds me out and I don't like it. That's why I'm talking about it. So let's go on to his proposal for center right. Center right, he wants retired Navy Admiral William McRaven. Admiral McRaven, you are probably a lot less familiar with. McRaven was is a pretty classic never Trumper, also a war hawk. He's military, so we'll forgive him for being a war hawk. But, war hawking has traditionally been perceived as a right-wing position. But the left has a pretty big thirst for blood, too, the last decade. So, well, really the last 2 decades. They pretend that they don't, but I mean, Hillary, she loves some blood. And we all know what Obama did with those drones. I think we all know. So, I suppose it's noble when a Democrat goes to war. So, it's so noble that Obama got a Nobel Prize for it, for all the wars that he conducted. Yes, I know that the word Nobel is not the same as the word noble. But either way, McRaven has been highly, highly critical of Trump's planned removal of troops from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, alongside the Democrats, who are supposedly anti-war and hate all the military spending. Trump's like, hey, what if we pulled out of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, and some other places too? And the Democrats are flipping out because they don't actually have a position on it. Their position is just whatever the opposite of Trump's position is. So, in specific reference to pulling troops out of these places, McRaven recounted that another general told him, quote, Trump is destroying the republic, to which McRaven agreed and added that, quote, it is time for a new person in the Oval Office. The fate of the republic depends on it. That's right, guys. The fate of the republic depends on pouring endless gallons of American blood into the Arabian sands. With all due respect, McRaven, go fuck yourself. McRaven had very little to say during the Obama administration about the rules of engagement that basically made soldiers target practice for jihadists. And if these soldiers returned fire in the Middle East, they basically ended up at Leavenworth, which is something that Dyer and I have talked about quite often. Ending those terms of engagement where we are sending countless soldiers off to get shot at by jihadists and they're not allowed to shoot back. Ending that is a threat to the republic. Fuck off, good sir. So in addition to McRaven's war hawkishness, McRaven was furious that Trump revoked the security clearance of former CIA Director John Brennan in 2018 when it became clear that John Brennan was using his clearance to leak classified materials to the press and using his credentials as the former CIA director to launder conspiracy theories about Russian collusion to the media, pretending like he knew the truth when he was really just lying and using his resume to say, well, if anyone would know, it would be Brennan, when he was really just lying about it. Which we now know everything that he said during that time, all the lies about Russiagate that John Brennan said in the media. We now know that that's been entirely fabricated. We've got the Durham report, we had the Horowitz report, we had testimony from the closed door hearings where Brennan said under oath that he didn't actually, in fact, have any knowledge of the things that he was talking about in the media when he was proposing all these conspiracy theories about Trump and Russia. So he's an explicit liar. And Trump pulled his security clearance so that he would have less ability to be leaking classified materials and lying to the press and to the American people. And McRaven was furious that Trump would take away his clearance. Let's see here. So John Brennan is also explicitly a communist. This is not a conspiracy theory. This has been confirmed, proven by Snopes itself. Snopes proved they went out and hunted it down. They said it was mostly false that he's a communist, but they had to admit that John Brennan has also admitted and been shown in his voter records that John Brennan voted for the Communist Party in the 70s. I don't know how a not communist finds himself voting for communism in the 70s, especially, I mean, that's right at the tail end of the Cold War. My history is awful. But, I mean, the Communist Party in the 70s was a lot more ever-present as a danger in the American psyche in the 70s than it is today, although I think Antifa is doing their best to change that. But for somebody in the 70s to have voted communist, like, that's a big hurdle to have jumped. That's a big hurdle of, I really don't like America. I really like the communists. I'm going to vote for the communists. I would say that if anything outs you as an explicit communist, it would be voting for the Communist Party in the 70s. But McRaven is defending Brennan. McRaven loves communists who subvert our government and leak classified materials. What a patriot. And McRaven, well, he is a patriot because Brett Weinstein said he was. Brett Weinstein proposed him as a candidate worthy of patriotism. So I guess it's patriotic to support communism and support the undermining of our classification system and undermining of the executive branch. In McRaven's eyes, being a communist and using your position to undermine the duly elected president is worthy of vigorous defense, and ending a generational war with humiliating rules of engagement is a threat to the republic. I got it. So, is McRaven center-right? I don't know. I guess. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't really know what center-right is. Again, the right is such a big tent. The center is such a broad scope. But certainly, I don't think that this guy is. I mean, regardless of if we're looking for center-right or center-left, like, fuck this guy. I don't want him anywhere near politics. That's awful hot takes on these very key issues. I'm sure if I dug into him a little bit more, because I know that he's a rather rabid anti-Trumper. He shows up on some of the lamestream media every now and then as kind of a putting some patriotic they love dressing up these admirals in their military uniform and marching them out there to say we hate Trump. The left loves that, even though they really hate the military and law enforcement. They do love it when the military and law enforcement like turn on the ideological enemies, because it's not that the left doesn't like the military and not that the left doesn't like the police. It's that they want the police to be under their control against their enemies. They want the military to be under their control attacking their enemies. That's why you see them someone like Biden, who's on the left. I don't think he's as hard left as Antifa is, but he's certainly got his puppet strings on him pretty good there. That's why he said, I think the military will walk in and remove Trump when he doesn't accept the election results. He's kind of fantasizing about using the military against his ideological opponents. That's very common on the left. So they love it when someone like McRaven here kind of defects over to the left and supports the undermining of the U.S. government, supports letting all the other soldiers that aren't so lucky to be general or admiral, I suppose. He's so happy to let them get shot at and killed. And if they are so bold as to not die and they are so bold as to shoot back, well, he's just so happy to see them sent off to Leavenworth. Fuck this guy. Let's see here. So under Brett's plan, so again, this was Brett's two candidates that he said he picked out Yang and McRaven as examples of center-left and center-right that exude patriotism, competence, and what was the other one? I'm a Joe Biden moment here. Courageousness. So he thinks that these guys exhibit patriotism, courage, competence, and they're both center-left and center-right. Whoo, boy. I mean, there was no pressure on Brett to pick any particular person. He literally had like the 360 million Americans to choose from, and these are the two guys that he chose. Again, little less problem with Yang. I think Yang's pretty benign. I think he's kind of quirky. I kind of like him. I think he'd be good in some kind of advisory position. I don't think he'd be great at the presidency. This McRaven guy, I think he just fucking gets off on seeing soldier blood out in the field, but I'll let that one go. So Brett, this was his plan. So this was what he chose. He had, again, the entire American population to choose from. This is what he chose. Under Brett's plan, we'd get a unity ticket consisting of a center-ish left candidate who has proposals for new big government apparatus to solve our problems, and a center-ish right candidate who vigorously defends the existing establishment. In McRaven's eyes, wait, did I read that? Yeah. So it's, you've got Yang, who has all these new ideas, all these new proposals for new government entities, new bureaucracy to fast track citizenship, new stuff for UBI. He had a bunch of plans for how to re-regulate the tech industry to make it work for America. All this new bureaucracy. So half of Brett's plan was to have the unity of Yang, which is brand new big government establishment, and he wanted to marry that to the unity of McRaven, who's very for the existing establishment. He's McRaven very much vigorously defending the wars that we're already in, keeping everybody there, keeping the war going, defending the establishment of the CIA, the other bureaucracies, defending against Orange Man bad, because Orange Man isn't part of the establishment, so you got to vigorously defend against him. And so that's what we get in Brett's plan here. The unity of new big government with defending old big government. That's just fucking amazing. Thank you, Brett. You're so smart. You're so goddamn smart. Notably, the viewpoint not expressed here is small government conservatism, or libertarianism, if you will. But if you really think about it, that's kind of to be expected with someone like Brett. Brett is a planner. And the problem with planners is they can only think of different ways to plan. Not planning is by definition not something they are capable of considering. Let me say that again. The planners will never consider not planning. We see this in big government policy all the time, mostly on the left, but sometimes on the right. The more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. I stole that from Andrew Wilkow, but it's still a true statement. Probably the biggest example of this was regulations driving up the cost of healthcare at the end of the last century. So Obama, a grade A planner. I mean, that was literally his resume. It was that he was a community organizer, which is another way to say planner. So after the healthcare prices started spiking, Obama's plan was to layer Obamacare on top of the failing healthcare system. Then when that didn't work, and it actually made healthcare even more expensive, Hillary ran in 2016 on adding another layer on top of Obamacare. Because, again, the more the plans fail, you got to just more plans on top of it. That's, again, the philosophers, if it's not working, they just need to philosophize more. The engineers, if it's not working, you just need to engineer more. The scholars, you just need to scholar more. And I forget. The communists. You just need to communism more. That's always the plan. Is whatever your expertise is. Well, you just need more of that expertise, and eventually it's going to work, right, guys? Come on, it's going to work. We can do this. And so we see this with healthcare. They never consider not planning. They never consider, well, what if we deregulated selling insurance over state lines? What if we deregulated the pharmaceutical industry? What if we deregulated the way that Medicare is paid out and all this crazy paperwork? Like, what if we did less paperwork? What if we had less plans to orchestrate this stuff? They never consider that. It's always got to be more plans. The solution to a failed plan is more planning. And so you might find yourself swapping out the word planning for scheming, as I often do. And you basically come to the exact same conclusion. To the planners and the schemers, the idea of the unguided masses running amok under conservative libertarianism is quite unthinkable, which explains why Brett's first instinct was to propose McRaven and Yang as the unity candidates. In McRaven, he found the defense of the entrenched establishment, which is really a defense of the mountainous stack of previous plans. And in Yang, he found a prolific planner with schemes for massive welfare programs, massive structural changes to the economy, and another healthcare plan to layer on top of Obamacare. Brett Weinstein's proposal is the unity of entrenched establishment and the creation of more establishment. God, this guy's a fucking genius. He's so smart, guys. He's so much smarter than you. I just don't understand how no one sees how smart he is. So the only conclusion I can draw on Unity 2020 is that Brett is just another charlatan planner. Charlatan might be a bit of a strong word, because I do believe that he does think his proposal is good, but again, that only makes him arrogant, which in a lot of ways is a much deeper character flaw than just being dishonest, in my humble opinion. Okay, so liberty. Let me take a drink of water here, and I'll check out the chat for a second. We'll go on to what maybe a defense against the planners would be. So let's see here. Trevor, what kind of insane, defective human being sits around and schemes about how to control other people's lives? Well, it's the quote-unquote intellectuals. So they, I consider myself to be very smart. I used to think that communism was bad because it didn't let people choose. But in theory, it was a good way to organize the economy because I thought that centralized planning made sense to me. My background is in mathematics and algorithms and supply chain management. I was like, well, I mean, if you could centralize all those things, you could really plan out the economy pretty well. And that was actually a result of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where I didn't know enough about how supply chain management worked to realize how wrong I was. I thought I knew a lot of it. And so my bias and expertise, the Dunning-Kruger effect, is that, you know, when you know a little bit about something, you kind of think that you know everything there is to know about it. And as you learn more, you realize that there's kind of a lot of stuff that you don't know, so you become less confident that you know everything that there is to know. And then eventually, as you learn more after that, you get more confident that, yeah, you do actually have a good grasp of the subject. And so in my early days, I kind of thought, yeah, that made sense. But as I learned more supply chain management, more about how algorithms work, I realized that there is no way to centralize the way that the economy works with a single algorithm. The way capitalism works, the way the free market works, is actually an example of a distributed algorithm where every agent, which is you guys, under capitalism, you guys are all free agents to pick and choose what you want. And it's the aggregate of all your decisions. It's a bunch of little, think of it, a bunch of little AIs, which is what you guys are. You know, it's almost like you're a real intelligence. We'll call them RIs. How about that? You got a bunch of little RIs out there running around, all making independent decisions, and they're all making them slightly differently. And then the decision the free market comes to is kind of a cloudy aggregate that it thinks the optimal price for something is about here based on all the different decisions of all the individual agents, and distributing that decision-making process across all those different agents comes to a much better approximation of where that price should be than if you pulled that decision-making process away from all of those individual economic actors and just centralize it in a computer somewhere and then just put in your own guesses for it. Because, you know, when you're out there looking for, let's say bread, because the communists love bread. It's not really a problem in America, but let's say you had, it was at the end of the stocking day, and so there's only like a couple of pieces of bread there. Or a couple of loaves. So you're going to look at that and say, okay, I don't know. I guess I'm willing to pay like, anywhere from like $1.50 to $2 for like a loaf of bread. And then someone else comes by and they're like, you know what? I'd pay, $1.25 to like $1.75. I don't think it's worth any more than that. And they're both kind of right, kind of wrong. And then the market can kind of decide, okay, well, this is where their decision process overlaps, is somewhere in the 160 range. So the market's going to say, well, the loaf of bread should cost 160, and then the supplier of bread can decide whether or not 160 covers its cost to make it, and it'll either make more or less of it. Probably that day, if there's only one loaf of bread left, you're probably going to be willing to pay a lot more for it because you went there wanting bread, and if it's the only bread left, you're like, well, I kind of want that pretty bad. I'd pay as much as $5 to walk out of here with that, and thus the price goes up. And then the supplier of the bread says, hey, bread's pretty valuable. I better figure out how to make more of it. And so he makes more of it, and then supply jumps up to meet demand, and then the price restabilizes. You can't do that with a single big computer. It doesn't matter how big the computer is, because these decisions are playing out across all kinds of different economic actors. Humans are not computable. Not yet, anyways. We don't even know what we want sometimes, and it's very fascinating that the free market is basically an algorithm that figures out what we want when we don't even know what we want. Again, communism can't do that. Communism's not creative. It can't generate new things. That's why China has to steal all of our tech. They steal cars, they steal computing technology, they steal all that stuff and they copy it and they clone it. But they're not good at making new stuff. Even their rockets, they stole that from us. Which actually Bill Clinton sold that to them. So I guess that's a win for China and a loss for America because Bill Clinton was corrupt. But anyways, the point remains that they are not capable of generating new things because they can't calculate it. Whereas capitalism is fully capable of somehow figuring out what we want before we even know that we want it. I mean, we have all these new technologies that weren't even able to be concepted 60 years ago, and somehow the free market generated them because we wanted them, and it gave it to us, and now we have it. Communism can't do that. It's just too closed up of a system. So, liberty. Let's see here. Fox, you need to clip that explanation you just gave of the free market works and make a video out of it all by itself. I'm probably, while I'm doing some of this stuff on my own for the next several weeks, I will probably do some Fox economics, some Foxonomics. How about that? You guys heard of Freakonomics? Wait for Foxonomics. I got some ideas about what's about to happen to the economy and why, and I've got some opinions on the monetary system and the Fed and a bunch of other stuff that we just usually don't have time to go over during news recap shows or discussion shows. And so I might take this time to go over some of that stuff. So I'm sure my idea of how the free market works will probably make a return at some point. So we just went over how Brett's unity plan is, again, the unity of more establishment and defending the previous establishment. Whoo boy. I think that maybe we could try liberty. That's crazy, right? I fully admit that our system as it's currently working is not doing real well. Maybe it's barely passing at this point. It's even kind of likely that the American system is bad, or at least that it has become bad. I fully believe in my concept of the perfect society, the forms of the perfect society was the Constitution. I think that did a very good job of getting as close to that perfect form as possible, even though forms is a ridiculous concept. But we've strayed away from that quite a bit. I actually found it funny. There was what Trump said about possibly or he asked if we'd be interested in postponing the election on Twitter yesterday, which caused an uproar. And in that, some of the analysis of that brought up the sections of the Constitution where it talked about the date for the election, and it was right next to a section talking about Congress convening. And in the Constitution, it's so adorable. They said that the Congress, the House, has to convene at least once per year. And I thought it was so adorable and quaint. And I longed for this time when the Founding Fathers thought that Congress would be done at a certain point, and they just wouldn't have any new laws to pass, and so they wouldn't convene for up to a year at a time. Oh, God, that's, man. I just get tingles thinking about that, and I thought that was really cute that they put that in the Constitution for us. I don't think that we're going to need that clause anytime soon, but I appreciate their optimism. That's very optimistic wording to put in there. Let's see here. So, again, Constitution, good, but the current American system that's been the Leviathan government that has been stacked on top of the Constitution. The Constitution was a good plan, and the planners could not stop. They had to keep making plans and more plans over top of the Constitution. That made it not so great. So I want us, though, to be wary of the plan. Even if our system's not doing real great right now, be wary of the planners coming to you with solutions that put the planners at the top. It's not a bargain to exchange a bad system with bad rulers for a system that is maybe less bad with dictators that are supposedly benevolent at the helm. If we are to change society, we ought not exchange one master for another, but rather try something actually liberating. As a mostly libertarian myself, I think that maybe we could try putting some libertarians in charge, and let liberty naturally organize the population into whatever form they want. And if the libertarian rulers are corrupt, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because they wouldn't have the levers of power to use over you anyways. And, the libertarians know what is good because they know that good is whatever the individual decides is good. And, if something about this libertarian society isn't working, maybe we could just try adding more liberty to it. Hope you guys see what I did there. But let's so that's kind of my solution to that is, maybe try less. Maybe try less planning. Maybe the plan should be to take down some of the existing plan and see if that works. But Brett's solution was more planning, keep the old planning and add more on top of it. This is kind of the end of what I had to say about Unity 2020, but while we are on the topic of Brett Weinstein, I do want to continue dismantling him. I will. This actually refers a little bit to something that Triumvirate said a little while ago. And so I want to again caveat, though, that Brett Weinstein is a fantastic biologist. He's made some really great contributions to the field. But he needs to stay in his goddamn lane and remove himself from the political discussion. Obviously, I don't mean cancel him. He is free to spout nonsense if he likes. It's his First Amendment right to do so. But I really think he should choose to focus on what he's good at, and not politics. For the rest of us, I think that Brett Weinstein's commentary is of such little value that we should ignore it entirely. I'm not trying to tell you not to listen to the other side. If you want to listen to him, great for you. I'm just pointing out that there are a limited number of hours in your day, and your time would be wasted listening to his low-quality political ideas. And this is why. Before getting canceled at Evergreen, Brett spent basically his whole career playing footsie with the lefties. Leftists. A little distinction there. In interviews about what happened to him at Evergreen, Brett said that it was only in the year or so leading up to the event that he noticed how radical the college had become. He notes how the college had become very focused on race and that it was propagating the theory of intrinsic racism, which is the idea that all whites are inherently racists. In interviews since he resigned from Evergreen, Brett, in his own words, casts himself as the hero, and that he was pushing back on these initiatives to stoke a lot of racial politics into the college. But curiously, he also, in his own words, Brett says, quote, "Suddenly, effectively authoritarian measures were occurring at the college with no discussion." This part really gets me. The idea that it was 2017 when all this SJW race war stuff just happened, all of a sudden, such a surprise. Anyone who thinks that all this stuff just happened, just started up out of the blue 3 years ago, has not been paying attention. But I think it goes deeper than that, because I think Brett was paying attention, and I think that he didn't recognize the cultural Marxism as a bad thing in the decades leading up to his getting canceled. And why should he? Like I said, he's been playing footsie with the left his whole life. Even during the controversy at Evergreen, Brett was engaging in struggle sessions where he fully admitted that he was benefiting from white privilege. It's really funny, this idea the elite white liberals have, that they got their success through white privilege and that it is evident that they have white privilege because they're successful. It's a really decadent thing to think. It's a really elitist thing to think, because, of course, it looks like privilege to them. They were successful. It looks like privilege to Brett. He was successful. But white privilege does nothing to explain white people who aren't successful. In America, most poor people are actually white. Do they have white privilege? I don't think so. I know the left wants to pretend that they do. And so when you cherry pick only successful white people, yeah, it kind of looks like there's some kind of bias there. It kind of looks like there's white privilege. But the idea of white privilege doesn't fit the data when you apply it to all white people, including those poor ones. It seems less likely that Brett got to where he was because of white privilege, and more likely that he got there through hard work. But his leftist leanings have given him a guilty conscience about being white. Who knows? Maybe he does have some deep-seated racist beliefs, and that's why he feels guilty. Who am I to say? But the biggest reason to ignore Brett is because of the way he achieved his political fame. His demise at the hands of the left came after a lifetime of tacitly supporting and encouraging the left. There are countless people who have been calling out the academic left for decades. Brett only found out that it was bad after they canceled him. He's really no better than J.K. Rowling or any other celebrity that suddenly woke up after they got canceled. There's a whole bunch of celebrities where they were right there with the cancel culture mob, and then all of a sudden it came for them, and they're like, whoa, 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 cancel culture's not good. We can't have this. And this is what I see with Brett Weinstein. He was so supportive of the left and the leftist ideals, and he did not gatekeep or defend against cultural Marxism seeping into the universities. It is a total... It is either dishonest or extremely naive to believe that just happened in 2017. It's been happening for decades now, and it's not really a principled position that after the mob comes from you, you're like, oh well, now I think it's bad. I know I was supporting it 10 minutes ago, but now they got me, so I think it's bad. I don't really think that's a principled or valuable position. Just like I don't like someone like a Sarah Silverman. Like I really don't think that her position on cancel culture is very valuable in any of the other celebrities. I really, it's funny to me, but I don't see any value in what they have to say about it. And I think that Brett should be treated the same way. It's kind of like he got shot by a bullet and we're treating him like he's a gun safety expert. In this analogy, the SJWs would be the bullet and Marxism would be the gun. Brett Weinstein should be particularly ignored because he was unable to see this coming. He was either unable or unwilling to perceive the left's Marxist creep through his institution over the course of decades. Being blind to something doesn't make you an expert on it, but people are taking him seriously and treating him like an expert on this thing that he never saw coming. Yet the people who have been seeing and warning about the left, especially in the universities, for decades, people like Glenn Beck, Hannity, Andrew Wilkow, the late Andrew Breitbart, Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, especially Mark Levin, and a lot of other names, they have been warning about this sort of thing coming for at least 20 years. They have been warning about the Marxist infiltration of the universities. They have been warning about this kind of Marxist revolution happening for decades. For decades. A lot longer ago than 2017. They have been saying for decades that the left hates America and wants to tear it down for years. They identified that it was coming from the universities for years, and they were all dismissed as far-right conspiracy theorists. Yet Brett, who clearly thought the leftist takeover of the universities was a conspiracy theory right up until 2017, right up until the point where they lynched him, is somehow the expert that we should all be turning to. Yet the guys who accurately predicted this stuff 20 years early, they're not new and exciting, so I guess they should just generally be ignored. Is that what I'm supposed to take away from this? So beware the planners and beware the recent converts, for they are the most dangerous of all. It is the people like Brett Weinstein who were supposed to be the guardians of America's great university system. People like Brett either ignored or were incapable of recognizing the growth of Marxism in their institutions for decades. They utterly failed to defend America. Brett failed to defend the American university system. I am sure that he is a great biologist. I know he is. I even know that he is. But his political acumen is not only wrong, I think it's dangerous. The only way that Marxism was able to get such a stranglehold on our university institutions was because of people like Brett that let it happen for 40 years. It is his fault. There is no other way that it could have happened unless people like Brett sat there and watched it happen, or they didn't even realize it was happening because they weren't capable of perceiving it. The current culture war did not just suddenly pop into existence 3 years ago, and anyone who thinks it did should not be considered an intellectual. Brett should not be considered an intellectual. In closing, we're almost done here, guys. I thank you very much for being with me. In closing, remember to beware of the planners. They only know how to plan. And beware of the recent converts, meaning leftists who were canceled, because they have proven themselves to be the least able to perceive what is happening around them. There is no wisdom to be gained in tiger hunting from a guy that got eaten by a tiger. Brett got eaten by the tiger. We should not be going to him to ask him wisdom about how to hunt the tiger. He got eaten by the SJW mob. He has no wisdom to give us about how to defend against the SJW mob. He should not be listened to. He should be ignored. He really should get out of politics and focus on his biology work. He's doing great stuff there. He should keep it up. Unity 2020 is one of the most childish propositions I've seen. It's not quite as childish as the Green New Deal, but it's up there. It's up there, and I think he should be embarrassed that he put it out. Thank you guys so much for a great night. Thank you guys for listening to Fox Ranting for almost an hour and a half. Not too bad. I hope you guys all enjoyed it as much as I did. Dyer will be back alongside me tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern for our Saturday weekly news recap. I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for being here. Trevize signing off.